Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to crack open the blueprint, the secret sauce, really, behind successful development projects. We're going to look at the one thing that can make or break them. So yeah, let's dive right in.
So what is it, right? What's this magic ingredient? Is it just a ton of money, having the perfect team, or maybe just pure luck? Well, according to the source material we're digging into, it's actually something way more fundamental. It's this one thing that's woven into every single part of a project's life. And that secret ingredient is information. But, we're not talking about just any old data. We're talking about high-quality, relevant, and timely information. Think about it. It's literally the difference between just guessing and actually knowing, between stumbling around in the dark and navigating with a super clear map.
You can really think of information as the lifeblood of a project. It's what nourishes that initial idea, it keeps the day-to-day stuff running smoothly, and at the end of the day, it's what lets us look back and see if the whole thing was a measurable success. And get this whole process, it starts way before anyone even thinks about breaking ground.
That's right, the groundwork for a winning project, it's all laid out before day one. The info you gather right at the start, it basically sets the entire course for everything that's going to happen later.
Okay, so right at the beginning, there are three things that are they're non-negotiable. First up, you've got to clearly define your purpose. Like, what are you actually trying to do here? Second, you figure out how you're going to measure your progress. And third, and this one is so important, you collect what's called baseline data.
Now, this idea is so simple, but man, is it powerful. Baseline data is really just a snapshot of how things are before you do anything. It's your point A. Because think about it, without that point A, you might get to point B, but you have no way of proving how far you've actually come. It makes measuring your real impact pretty much impossible.
All right, so you've done all your prep, the project's up and running. Now this is where information totally changes its job. It's not just the planning tool anymore. It becomes your GPS, your active navigation system for the day-to-day grind of managing and supervising everything.
But here's a really key thing to remember. Not everybody needs to see the same information. Your project manager, the person on the ground, they need really specific data, Like, are we on time? Are we on budget? But the overall supervisor, they need a much bigger picture, that 30,000-foot view, to see if the project is still on track with the larger goals and to plan what's next.
So to make all this work, you've got information flowing across at least 3 different levels, and they're all connected. You've got the data for the actual work being done. Then you have reports from your team to track how that work is going. And finally, all of that stuff gets fed back into the ongoing planning for what to do next. It's this constant circular flow, this feedback loop.
And this really highlights a much more modern way of thinking about projects. The best ones, they aren't just one-way streets where orders come from the top. No, they use what's called a learning process approach. And that just means there's a constant conversation happening. Information has to flow from the project team out to the community, and, this is crucial, it has to flow from the community back to the team.
All right, let's jump to the end game, the final phase. This is all about looking back. You've done the planning, you've done the managing, you've done the work, and now it's time to ask the biggest, most important question of all.
This really is the moment of truth. And finding the answer, that's the job of evaluation. See, it's not enough to just make a list of what you did. Evaluation is about digging deep to understand what actually happened because of what you did, and maybe even more importantly, why it happened.
Okay, so here's something really important. Don't mix up appraisal and evaluation. They sound similar, but they're totally different. Appraisal happens before the project even starts. It uses economic models to ask, hey, is this even a good idea to begin with? But evaluation, that happens during and after. It uses things like surveys and interviews to ask, so what was our actual impact? 2 completely different questions that need 2 completely different toolkits.
And look at that, we've come full circle. This brings us right back to where we started. Without that baseline data we talked about, without your point A, trying to do a real, honest evaluation of your impact is, well, it's basically just a shot in the dark. That baseline data is the anchor for your entire claim to success.
So up to now, we've been talking about information like it's a technical tool, right? A nuts and bolts kind of thing. But now we got to pivot because there's a much deeper, much more complex challenge that kind of reframes this whole conversation. We need to talk about the politics of knowledge itself.
This quote from the source material, it's just incredibly powerful.
What it's saying is that the problem isn't that certain communities don't have information or can't speak up. The real problem is that the systems, the power structures in development, they're often just not built to listen. The voices are there, they're just not being heard.
And the consequences of that, they're huge. When you don't view a local community as a worthy source of information, of actual expertise, you get what we call top-down development. Projects get planned for people instead of with them, and that so often leads to failure because it completely ignores that crucial local context and what people actually need.
You know, for a really long time, there was this assumption that so-called expert scientific knowledge was just better than local traditional knowledge. But that idea is being fundamentally challenged now. There's a growing movement to decolonize knowledge, and what that means is starting to value and bring in different ways of knowing. It means recognizing that, for example, indigenous knowledge systems, which have been built up over generations, hold incredible value, especially for sustainable development.
So we're going to end with this thought. Collecting information, it's the blueprint. It's the key to success in any project. That much is clear. But maybe the most vital question we have to keep asking ourselves is this: who are we collecting that information from? Who are we actually listening to? And at the end of the day, when we build that future, whose voice are we really using?